Hello, welcome to Media Dialogues. On the show today, we are talking about the urgent need to protect people from online scammers by creating awareness about digital fraud. Now, digital financial transactions have grown at a mind-boggling pace in India, and that's come at the cost of greater vulnerability to a spectrum of cyber attacks. So stakeholders in the ecosystem, from the banking regulator to the government of India, to individual banks, to fintech companies, to the police and big tech platforms, everyone's pulling out all stops to ensure cyber security. Google has just launched a multimedia awareness campaign as well as a slew of other initiatives to discuss how big the challenge is, how it keeps evolving, and why all stakeholders must collaborate to counter this threat. I'm talking today to Sapna Chadha. She's the Vice President of Marketing India and Southeast Asia at Google. She's joining us from Singapore. And Sunil Mehta, Chief Executive of the IBA, or the Indian Banks Association, from Mumbai. I'm going to start by welcoming both of you. And Sunil, first question to you. Why now? Why are we seeing so much effort, and I mentioned some of it, come into place at this point of time? What makes it so urgent in September 2022?
Anuradha, you know, banking is a business of trust. And banking system has adopted technology in the last decade in a very faster pace. And as you rightly said in your opening remarks, that now the customer convenience is available for operation from their home for banking accounts, and the digital spread is going at a phenomenal speed. So when there is a new technology and there is a speed, there are inherent risks into it. Bankers are very much concerned for maintaining the integrity of the systems, because consumer confidence and trust is to be maintained. And thanks to our government and the regulator, that they have not allowed any bank to fail in past. And whenever there was some crisis, maybe on the asset quality side or other side, they found one big brother to help the smaller bank and take over that bank, so that the consumer interest is protected and depositors' interest is protected. And we have seen recent past that some of the banks were helped out by the banking system as well as by the government and the regulator, so that consumer trust in the banking system is protected. Now, if one cyber, like if somebody is due in a phishing attack, or somebody is just invited to click a link and then they lose the money, they shout at the top of a voice and everybody listens, and they think that the adoption of a banking technology, internet banking, may be a very risky proposition for them, and that may desist from the bank from coming on the digital platforms. Digital platforms are not only offering the conveniences, it is facilitating the financial inclusion. And now I think we can be proud that we are the largest UPI transaction performing country in the world.
Yes.
And the type of, say, the response available from the last mile vendors, like street vendors, accepting payment through QR codes, and people transacting because of the mobile applications, they can transfer the funds.
Scenario has changed, so much. I mean, you just, QR codes, we're just using it with such ease these days. UPI, cardless payments. Let me get Sapna in here. Sapna, Google has launched these initiatives. The campaign, we've seen this Do Kadam Aage, Rakhe Do Kadam Aage campaign that you've launched. And I find two things interesting. So I'm going to break this question up. The first part of the question is, I can see this attempt to be collaborative and that different stakeholders coming together to communicate a similar message. Why the need for collaboration? Then I'll get to the second part.
Oh, first of all, thank you for, I think, having this important discussion. As partners in India's breakout digital trajectory, we believe it's critical that the opportunity of connectivity does not come at the price of online safety. And we don't look at this just as a checkbox. It's the foundation of which we have built our platforms and our products. And Mr. Mehta said trust is so critical. And if you talk to anybody in the ecosystem, the banks, brands, platforms, everyone understands that ultimately we can't have connectivity come at the price of online safety. And we need to build trust in the ecosystem, which means everyone works together. And I think why collaboration? Ultimately, none of us can do this alone. And I think, as I've spoken to many of our partners that have come behind this campaign, it's more than a campaign. It's actually a it needs to be always on. It needs to be a way
Yes.
that we work together and that we actually all join hands, because there's harms and there's threats that exist that, are taking the world by storm, and are taking small towns, rural areas, small businesses are being taken, advantage of. And ultimately, we won't be able to do this if we don't work together. So for us, collaboration was just born out of the idea that none of us can do this alone.
Why did you narrow down on phishing? Because there are so many different things that are, in which people can be targeted. Why phishing? Is that because it's the most common?
I wouldn't say that. Actually, our campaign covers a number of things. Phishing is one of the areas which we've gone deep into, but our messages are really around making sure that people aren't falling prey to suspicious links, that they're also making sure that they're looking at what links that they're clicking on, right? Do you know who you're having this relationship with, right? So I wouldn't say it just touches phishing. We also have realized that we need to do our part on education, whether it's with children. So part of our campaign is focused on underrepresented groups, those that are most at risk, and educating them. We've also realized, working with developers, this is on the startup community, and developers are also grappling with how to keep their citizens and their customers safe as well. So how we can strengthen the ecosystem on cybersecurity on the whole. So phishing is definitely something that we have seen, and is an area which we need to drive more awareness of. That's what drove, some of our messaging around that. But I would say it's not going to be focused on just one thing.
Sunil, let me get you in here. Give me a sense of who are the most vulnerable, because, Sapna alluded to the fact that there are some sections of our online population who are perhaps more vulnerable than others. Who would you say, from the bank's perspective, are more vulnerable?
I will say it's all sections of society, because sometimes the vulnerability is not driven just by awareness, it's driven by greed also.
Yes.
You get a lottery offer the way the Google Do Kadam Aage campaign. So people become so greedy that they think overnight they will get their money multiplied, or they will buy something very cheap the way the mango ad with the Google has created. So all type of customers are vulnerable. I won't say it's the last mile who is only getting impacted. Basically, those who are well aware, those who are educated, sometimes they fall into trap because of the positive or the negative incentives built into the messages. They will say that tonight your electricity will be disconnected if you do not go to this link and pay your bill. And people are not aware whether the bill has been paid somebody in the family. So they may go to the link and give the data, and later they realize that it was a phishing attack and they have taken away the entire data and their money is gone from their accounts.
Right.
So these vulnerabilities are in each section of the society.
So it's not just senior citizens or young, millennials, people who transact very frequently, or people with less, on the lower end of the digital literacy spectrum. So there is no cohort like that that's particularly on the radar of these scammers.
Rather, those who are more literate are more vulnerable, because they get more tempted to opt for the newer options, cheaper things, and awareness, because their awareness is more. So their vulnerability is also more, because they want to go for a better buying deal and all that. Sure. So it's not just specific to one segment. And like last mile, they have got. They're also vulnerable, but sometimes the balances are also very low in their accounts, which do not tempt much of these scammers to approach those accounts. So what they do is they try to find out people, those who have balances in their account and are vulnerable to these ideas, by accepting the offers of so many mangoes at a low price, or maybe a lottery, or maybe the threat of a power cut, or threat of so they get more duped.
Right. Sapna, I did read that you all have also at Google made certain grants available to some NGOs working with senior citizens, with women. Do you agree with Sunil that it's not any one particular cohort, and yet some people may need a little bit more, sort of understanding or training in digital safety?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And we were actually talking about this, that at our launch, where we were discussing how even people like us, you and I, perhaps we have, thought about clicking on something. I know certain groups' radars are up, but they're still susceptible, and other groups maybe might not be thinking about this, which is why we made grants, around $2 million from our google.org to help high-risk groups. And that's the thing, if they're higher risk, but everybody else is susceptible. But women, seniors, and other underrepresented groups like the LGBTQIA plus community is at risk. And I think when we think about safety, it does go beyond just financial fraud, in our opinion.
Yes.
There's numbers of cyberbullying, right? There are other issues that we need to be mindful of. And as at Google, that's why we're thinking about this more holistically. But when we look at the main issue on the ground today, as you mentioned, like we are seeing phishing is one of the largest. And that's why from a banking partnership standpoint, we said, let's work together on this one because we can all actively work on this. But the problem is much larger, and it's only going to get more complex as time goes on.
Sunil, do you think law enforcement is keeping pace with these complaints when they do come up?
So one thing I must say, and I must compliment the government, that they have really created a lot of enablers for it. One thing is, now there is a 24-hour SOC which is being operated by the banking system to prevent the phishing attacks on the system. Then there is the government has already come out with a certain is basically all the financial institutions are mandated that if there is any cyber attack, the message should be passed on to the certain so that it is analyzed, the origins can be tracked, and the culprits can be booked. Then banking system has also gone for a two-factor authentication to prevent fraud, at least. Simply by going to the internet, you're not able to use your password. You need a mobile confirmation also. And then encryption, like 256-bit encryption has also been done by the banking system to protect. The CAPTCHA is also used so that bot-related or the robot-related.
Yes. But Sunil, you mentioned the two-factor authentication, and I know when that was announced, like when some of those recurring online subscriptions were, stopped by the RBI, and you had to, sort of do it individually again. You have this two-factor OTP-based authentication. Give me, I know there were several people who said, oh, this is coming in the way of our convenience. Oh, this is slowing things down. Because we are also getting used to the conveniences that technology offers. Do you think that we are, sort of a little guilty of wanting things to be very, very easy and therefore opening ourselves up and making ourselves susceptible to attacks? Same question to Sapna. Let Sunil quickly come in and then I'll get to you.
So, in fact, that's a human tendency. Everybody wants convenience, but not convenience at the cost of safety. So, I think two-factor authentication, our country's vulnerability and awareness level really needs this sector, and we are way ahead of the Western countries. Like even in US, when you use your card, there is no second-factor authentication. I've been to US and I used the card and nobody asked me about an OTP. But that way, I think our technologies like our India is now gaining a technological superiority on in creating the cybersecurity framework, which is helping the people at preventing these vulnerabilities. So I can say the system is doing good and all the stakeholders are playing more, but it need to be more because culprits are always a step ahead of the regulators and the those who are trying to protect the systems.
Right. Sapna, what do you make of people's reaction to all these layers of security that the financial system tries to put into place, and then the trade-off between being safe and being convenient?
I think this is an evolving space. I think when initially some of this new language and new terminology came out and new friction points were met with resistance. But I think we see it in a response from our users when we ask them what they care about. Online safety, protection, these are now coming up more and more just in the last few years where they're asking for more. And so because awareness is going up, I think what we're seeing is there's more openness. So just as an example, the second factor authentication exists on financial services, but even at Google, we've now, because our users expect it, we've built in protection into our products. So for example, we were the first consumer technology company to offer second factor, and now we're the first to turn it on by default. So in our products like Gmail or Chrome browser, because people are transacting through Chrome and otherwise, right? So we actually have enrolled an additional 150 million accounts in 2SV, but it's reduced hijacking risks by 50%. And so there's a belief in this now that I see existing, and there's an expectation that users have for built-in protection, and they expect not just the banks, right, or not just the government. They expect companies like Google, and all brands to actually be thinking about how are you keeping me safe.
Does this become something that companies have to be very conscious about when it comes to brand equity going forward, the security of customer data, the security of customer finances?
Absolutely, right. I think this is non-negotiable. And when I talk to my peers, whether they're food delivery companies or brands that are e-commerce across the board, ultimately, this is impacting everyone. That's why, as we came together for this effort, it goes even beyond just the banks, right? It's actually around trust and safety across the board. And any marketer will tell you today that when we're looking at what is driving our usage, a product like Google Pay, it's only because of trust that exists in a company like Google that actually drives a willingness and a usage that we actually didn't, never expected to see the kind of take up that Mr. Mehta has talked about. But because there's trust, there's willingness to work with brands that are, again, taking that extra step and making sure that it's coming across as authentic, right? This isn't just about, we want to get you through the funnel as fast as possible. Please make a transaction. Actually, you'll see in many places, there's alerts that we're giving, and a lot of brands are giving. Are you making too large of a transaction? Are you sure you want to do this? And never share your details, right? Because sometimes in two-way, you don't realize, am I sending money or am I receiving money? It's really easy to do the opposite of what you were saying. So how do we make sure that we are putting that trust in place? So I think it's an imperative more than it's ever existed in the past.
Okay, hold on to that thought. We'll take a quick commercial break, but we'll be back very soon. And we're going to keep talking about how the threats that are coming in are changing and how the communication to deal with those threats has to keep evolving as they come in. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Media Dialogues on CNBC-TV18, and I'm talking to Sapna Chadha of Google and Sunil Mehta of the Indian Banks Association, and we are discussing what it will take to keep people safe in their digital financial transactions. Sunil, while we are talking about all the rapid changes that technology is bringing in financial transactions and commercial transactions, what is interesting is that it's not just these kind of attempts to defraud people. There's something else that the RBI came out with guidelines last month, right, for digital lending, and that's not in this zone at all. But we do know that one of the reasons that those guidelines were brought into place, and contentious guidelines, because we know that not everybody has received them well in that space, but there has been this fear that the reason these guidelines were needed is the fear that people needed to be protected, isn't it, from unscrupulous lenders, from extortionist interest rates, and from strong arm tactics used to recover money. You want to just weigh in on that, because wouldn't you need to inform your customers about this as well, right?
So you're perfectly right, and the basic purpose of RBI guidelines on this fintech issue is because there are all type of players in the market. Some of the fintechs, they have not been so ethical, and they have adopted to the type of practices which were detrimental to the interest of the borrowers. And borrowing need is a need of a very large segment of the society.
Yes.
And if they think that quick money is available through a digital lending program, they're prone to give their data, they're prone to give their initial charges, and sometimes they will feed the company in the name of giving a loan, realize the service charges, and do not even disperse the loan, or sometimes they give false promises or do not give a right type of rate of interest, and sometimes they use the bank's platform for onboarding the customers, and later on people realize that it has nothing to do with the bank. So to protect the interest, because RBI, I must appreciate, our RBI is a very strong regulator, and that has been established even during the pandemic time. They have come out with a prudently guidelines. So this regulator has prevented a lot of such activities, and that will really facilitate the entire ecosystem, because people get duped when they become a easy offer of a loan without understanding the intricacies that in the long run there will be extortion, in long term there will be very high rate of interest, in long term there will be the stealing of their data which can be used elsewhere for some other purposes. And in India, the Data Privacy Act is still on the table of the parliament till it is passed. I think there are a lot of gaps available which people want to make advantage of it. So I think the regulator is on board, and it's a time we need to educate people about the not only the attacks on their running accounts, but about the digital lending platforms that are made available.
Right.
Many of them may be unscrupulous.
And I would imagine that, you know, in India, where people need to borrow so frequently for medical emergencies, for school emergencies, you know, just to get by, that these would be very attractive places to go to. Sapna, do you see, as technology evolves, as services that are available evolve, do you see your campaign and Google's efforts, not just this campaign, but Google's efforts holistically having to, address these also as in information dissemination and awareness creation? I mean, you know, digital lending, is this something that maybe your campaign would address at some point?
You know, I think when we look at it as a Google, our mission is all about information, right? And if you think about, and it's universal access to information, we take the quality of information served on platforms very seriously. So again, it goes beyond digital lending. And we have to counter the information when someone is searching. Are we able to surface the most authentic, the most accurate, right? So actually, you know, a lot of technology needs to be applied here. A combination of human intelligence, but also machine learning, for us to really be able to improve the authentic support that we're able to provide. For example, you know, we've suspended thousands of scammy accounts in India, auto-denied thousands of scam transactions, and systematically raised, you know, the barriers to entry for bad actors. Part of this is in the moment, what's happening, but also how can we get ahead and, you know, and actually block attempts that are inappropriate. And this goes across, you know, all of our products, and we need to make sure that an extra layer of protection from financial scams actually requires us to think about our advertisers, for example. Yes. Now we're required that our advertisers of financial services who may be looking at things like digital lending, that they're undergoing an independent verification and certification process before they can run any ads on our products, right? And so because of what we're seeing with digital lending and loans, we're working across the board. We have an organization globally called Trust and Safety with over 20,000 resources that are looking and working every day to keep the citizens that we take care of safe online. So it's the need of the hour. Actually, we need to all come together to continue to make sure that every citizen is 2 steps ahead. And from that lens, I think collaboration, allowing us to get this message out in this forum, it's very important that everyone comes together. And so from that lens, I just want to shout out to CNBC for allowing us here to also tell the story of how we all need to make the second nature on the internet and increase our safety habits. So thank you, Anuradha.
Thank you, Sapna. Thank you, Sunil. And good luck with all this effort that you all are making in this direction. And thank you, viewers, for watching. Tune in again for another conversation. And remember that you've got to stay ahead, because this world that offers so much convenience is also evolving. And there are landmines which we could step on if we are not careful. Thank you very much for watching.